Captain Sofia Martinez had survived 3 combat tours in Afghanistan, where split-second decisions meant the difference between bringing her crew home alive or in body bags. But walking through the pristine gates of Skyline Advanced Flight Academy on a crisp October morning felt more dangerous than any battlefield she'd ever faced. This wasn't about enemy fire or mechanical failures. This was about proving she belonged in an elite program where everyone had already decided a combat veteran like her was just taking up space meant for real pilots. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Academy's immaculate tarmac as Sofia made her way toward the main flight operations building. Her dress blues were pressed to regulation perfection, her combat ribbons catching the light with each measured step. 3 Purple Hearts, 2 distinguished flying crosses, and a bronze star with Valor told the story of a pilot who had earned her place through blood, sweat, and the kind of courage that most people only read about in military history books. Behind her walked 8 years of distinguished service, including 2,400 hours of documented flight time. Nearly 800 of those hours had been logged in active combat zones, piloting damaged aircraft through enemy territory, while evacuating wounded soldiers from landing zones that were under direct fire. She had landed helicopters with failing engines, flown through sandstorms that would ground commercial aircraft, and brought home crews that other pilots had written off as lost causes. But as Sofia approached the Academy's entrance, she could feel the weight of something far more challenging than enemy fire, the skeptical stares of her new classmates and the institutional resistance that seemed to follow female veterans wherever they tried to advance their careers. Skyline Advanced Flight Academy was the military's most prestigious pilot training facility, designed to prepare the next generation of elite aviators for the most demanding missions the service could offer. Only 12 pilots were selected each year from thousands of applicants, and the program had a 60% washout rate. Those who survived the 6-month gauntlet emerged as the military's premier pilots, virtually guaranteed positions in the most coveted squadrons and fastest track to command positions. Sofia had earned her slot through a combination of exceptional performance reviews, combat decorations, and recommendations from 3 different commanding officers who had witnessed her abilities under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Her application packet was so impressive that the selection board had approved her admission unanimously, noting that her real-world experience would bring valuable perspective to the program's academic environment. What none of them had mentioned was that she would be the only woman in her training cohort. She was also the only pilot over 30, and according to the whispered conversations she'd already overheard in the Academy's dining facility, she was apparently the only one worth discussing before she'd even introduced herself to the program. Staff. The Academy's main building was a monument to military aviation history, its walls lined with photographs of legendary pilots and aircraft that had shaped aerial warfare for the past century. Sofia paused briefly in the main corridor, studying a display case containing the flight helmet of Colonel Patricia Stevens, the first woman to command a fighter squadron in combat. The nameplate below the helmet read, "Excellence knows no gender, only dedication and skill." Sofia hoped the Academy's current leadership shared that philosophy. The Flight Operations Center buzzed with activity as morning briefings prepared to begin. Through the reinforced glass windows, Sofia could see several of her new classmates gathered around a tactical display, their conversation animated and clearly focused on technical specifications rather than personal gossip. These were serious pilots, she realized, men who had earned their places through the same kind of dedication and sacrifice that had brought her here. As she approached the main briefing room, Sofia noticed that conversation seemed to pause when she entered their peripheral vision. Not hostile exactly, but cautious. The kind of careful observation that suggested they were still forming opinions about the combat veteran who had joined their exclusive group. Commander Bradley Harrison stood at the front of the briefing room, reviewing flight schedules on a digital display that showed the day's training activities. At 45, Harrison was a career military officer with 22 years of service and a reputation for producing some of the Academy's most successful graduates. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing confident, and his expression suggested the kind of professional competence that had earned him command of the military's premier training program. Sofia had researched Harrison's background before arriving at Skyline. Distinguished graduate of the Naval Academy, combat veteran of 2 deployments, author of several technical papers on advanced flight training methodologies. By all accounts, he was exactly the kind of officer she expected to learn from during her time at the Academy. What she hadn't expected was the way his expression changed the moment he noticed her entering the briefing room. Harrison's professional demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly, his eyes narrowing as he took in her combat ribbons and veteran status. Sofia had seen that look before, during her early days in military aviation, when some officers seemed personally offended by the idea that a woman could excel in roles they considered exclusively masculine. "Captain Martinez," Harrison said, his voice carrying across the room with deliberate volume. "I was wondering when our celebrity pilot would make her appearance." The other pilots turned to watch, their expressions curious rather than hostile. Sofia maintained her military bearing, recognizing that Harrison was establishing some kind of test or challenge that would set the tone for her entire experience at the Academy. "Good morning, Commander," she replied crisply. "Reporting as ordered for advanced flight training." Harrison's smile was thin and calculated. "Advanced flight training," he repeated, as if the words amused him. "Tell me, Captain, during your extensive combat experience, did you have much opportunity to work on your hair and makeup between missions?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Sofia could feel the attention of every pilot in the room focusing on her response. This was clearly some kind of hazing ritual, designed to test her reaction to unprofessional commentary. "No, sir," Sofia replied evenly. "I was generally too busy keeping aircraft operational and crews alive to worry about personal grooming." Harrison's expression suggested he found her response inadequate. "I see. Well, I suppose that explains your approach to military appearance standards." He gestured vaguely toward her regulation uniform, which was pressed and worn according to every military standard Sofia knew. Then Harrison delivered the line that would change everything. "I just want to make sure you understand that the cockpit of an advanced military aircraft isn't designed to be a beauty salon," he announced, his voice carrying clearly to ensure every pilot heard his words. "This program requires focus on flying, not on looking pretty for photo opportunities." Cruel laughter rippled through several of the assembled pilots, the kind of calculated mockery designed to establish social hierarchy rather than build professional camaraderie. Sofia felt her jaw tighten, but she had faced worse humiliation in combat zones from men who later depended on her expertise to save their lives. She didn't offer a defensive response, didn't attempt to justify her presence or explain her qualifications, didn't waste energy engaging with someone who had obviously decided her worth before observing her capabilities. Instead, Sofia walked directly to an open seat in the briefing room, placed her training materials on the table with deliberate precision, and opened her flight manual to the day's assigned reading material. Her hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood that professional competence speaks louder than verbal arguments. "Commander," Harrison shook his head with theatrical disappointment, clearly satisfied with his public humiliation of the Academy's newest arrival. "We'll see how long that confidence lasts," he muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. What Harrison didn't realize was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his military career. Sofia Martinez wasn't just another pilot looking to advance through the system. She was a combat veteran who had survived situations that would have broken lesser officers, and she had learned long ago that the most dangerous enemies are often the ones wearing the same uniform. The beauty Salon comet would become legendary at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy, but not for the reasons Harrison expected. Sometimes the most devastating victories begin with a single moment of underestimation, and Harrison had just provided Sofia with all the motivation she needed to remind everyone in that room exactly what a real pilot could accomplish. The morning briefing was about to begin, and Sofia was ready to show them what 8 years of combat experience looked like when channeled through pure professional determination. The morning briefing lasted exactly 43 minutes, and every second of it felt like psychological warfare disguised as professional instruction. Commander Harrison delivered his overview of the Academy's training protocols with the kind of clinical precision that suggested he had given the same presentation hundreds of times. But his eyes kept drifting back to Sofia with obvious anticipation of watching her fail. The Skyline Advanced Flight Academy training program was structured around increasingly complex simulation exercises designed to push pilots beyond their comfort zones and into the realm of genuine expertise. The curriculum included everything from basic aerodynamic theory to advanced combat maneuvering, with each module building toward a final evaluation that would determine whether candidates graduated to elite squadron assignments or returned to coup, their previous duties with a permanent notation in their service records. The program maintains a 60% failure rate, Harrison announced, clicking through slides that showed statistical breakdowns of previous training cohorts. Not because we enjoy washing out qualified pilots, but because the missions you'll be assigned after graduation require capabilities that exceed normal military aviation standards. Sofia reviewed the training schedule Harrison distributed, noting the careful progression from fundamental exercises to increasingly demanding scenarios. The program was clearly designed by people who understood both the technical requirements of advanced aviation and the psychological pressures that could break even experienced pilots under stress. What caught her attention was the way Harrison lingered over certain exercises, particularly the ones with the highest failure rates. His presentation style suggested he took personal satisfaction in describing the pilots who had been unable to meet the Academy's demanding standards. Week 12 of the program features our most challenging evaluation exercise, Harrison continued, advancing to a slide that showed technical specifications for something called the Viper protocol. This simulation has been specifically designed to identify pilots who possess genuine capabilities versus those who have simply been fortunate enough to avoid real challenges during their previous assignments. The Viper protocol, according to Harrison's briefing materials, was a catastrophic failure scenario that combined multiple emergency conditions into a single exercise, lasting exactly 14 minutes. Pilots had to demonstrate their ability to manage simultaneous engine failure, navigation system malfunction, and combat maneuvering requirements while operating in simulated adverse weather conditions. The Viper protocol maintains an 87% failure rate, Harrison said, his voice carrying obvious pride in the exercise's difficulty. Even pilots with extensive flight experience frequently find themselves overwhelmed by the complexity of managing multiple emergency conditions while maintaining operational effectiveness. Sofia studied the technical specifications, recognizing several elements that resembled real-world situations she had encountered during combat deployments. Engine failures, navigation problems, and adverse weather were routine challenges in military aviation, particularly in combat zones where equipment maintenance was difficult and operational demands were constant. The difference was that combat pilots learned to handle these situations through necessity rather than simulation. When your helicopter's engine started failing while evacuating wounded soldiers from a hot landing zone, you didn't have the option of requesting a do-over or asking for Additional training time. Harrison's presentation moved on to other aspects of the training program, but Sofia noticed that several of her classmates seemed particularly focused on the Viper protocol slide. The exercise was clearly designed to be the program's defining challenge, the test that separated graduates from washouts. Lieutenant Ryan Cooper, sitting 2 seats away from Sofia, leaned over during a brief pause in Harrison's presentation. "That simulation exercise sounds brutal," he whispered. 87% failure rate means only 1 or 2 pilots from each cohort actually complete it successfully. Sofia nodded, appreciating Cooper's friendly gesture, but keeping her response minimal. She had learned during her early military career that building alliances was important, but demonstrating competence was more effective than seeking social validation from colleagues, who were still evaluating her qualifications. After the briefing concluded, Harrison called Sofia to the front of the room while the other pilots filed out to begin their first day of technical instruction. His expression suggested he had something specific planned, and Sofia recognized the familiar weight of being singled out for special attention. "Captain Martinez," Harrison began, his voice carrying false concern, "I've been reviewing your service record, and while your combat experience is certainly noteworthy, I have some concerns about your preparation for the academic demands of this program." Sofia maintained her professional bearing, understanding that Harrison was attempting to establish some kind of psychological advantage through manufactured doubt about her qualifications. "Could you be more specific about your concerns, Commander?" Harrison's smile was thin and calculated. "Advanced flight training requires a different mindset than combat operations," he explained, his tone suggesting he was offering helpful guidance rather than launching a personal attack. "Combat pilots develop habits that prioritize survival over precision, reaction over analysis. This program demands a more refined approach to aviation." The insult was carefully crafted to question her professional capabilities without using language that could be officially classified as discriminatory. Harrison was clearly experienced in walking the line between legitimate instruction and personal harassment. "I see," Sofia replied evenly. "And how would you recommend I address these concerns?" Harrison's expression brightened, as if he had been hoping she would ask exactly that question. "I think it would be beneficial for you to attempt the Viper protocol early in the program," he announced. "Rather than waiting for week 12 with the other candidates, you could demonstrate your capabilities during week 3. Consider it an opportunity to prove that your combat experience translates to academic excellence." The suggestion was obviously designed to humiliate her publicly. The Viper protocol was scheduled for week 12 specifically because pilots needed 11 weeks of intensive preparation before attempting such a complex exercise. Asking her to attempt it during week 3 was like asking a first-year medical student to perform brain surgery. Sofia understood the trap Harrison was setting, but she also recognized an opportunity. If she could somehow succeed at the exercise that defeated 87% of properly prepared pilots, it would establish her credibility beyond any doubt. "When would you like me to attempt the exercise?" she asked. Harrison's expression suggested he was delighted by her willingness to accept his challenge. "Tomorrow afternoon," he said. 1400 hours. Flight Simulator Bay 3. I'll make sure the other candidates have an opportunity to observe, since your performance will provide valuable learning opportunities for everyone." The setup was perfect from Harrison's perspective. Sofia would attempt an impossible exercise in front of her classmates, fail dramatically, and provide him with justification for questioning her suitability for the program. Her inevitable failure would also serve as a warning to future women who might consider applying to Skyline Advanced Flight Academy. What Harrison didn't realize was that he had just committed the tactical error that would end his career. Sofia Martinez wasn't intimidated by impossible challenges because she had been surviving them for 8 years. The Viper protocol might defeat 87% of Academy-trained pilots, but Harrison had never tested it against someone who had learned to fly under enemy fire. "I'll be ready, Commander," Sofia said calmly as she left the briefing room. Sofia could hear Harrison already making phone calls to ensure maximum attendance for tomorrow's demonstration. He was clearly planning to turn her anticipated failure into a teaching moment about the importance of understanding one's limitations. By tomorrow afternoon, Harrison would discover that some limitations exist only in the minds of people who have never been truly tested. Word spread through Skyline Advanced Flight Academy with the efficiency of a military intelligence network. By noon on Tuesday, every pilot, instructor, and technician knew that the combat veteran was attempting the Viper protocol during her first week of training. The Academy's dining facility buzzed with whispered conversations about whether she understood what she had agreed to attempt. Sofia spent Tuesday morning in the Academy's technical library, reviewing every available document related to the Viper protocol specifications. The exercise was designed around a scenario that combined the worst possible mechanical failures with the most challenging environmental conditions, all compressed into 14 minutes of continuous crisis management. The simulation began with routine flight operations that rapidly deteriorated into catastrophic system failures. Primary engine malfunction at minute 3, navigation system blackout at minute 5, hydraulic pressure loss at minute 7, and communication equipment failure at minute 9. Each emergency required specific responses within narrow time windows, and any single mistake would result in simulated aircraft loss and automatic exercise termination. What made the exercise particularly brutal was its requirement for manual calculations while managing multiple simultaneous emergencies. Pilots had to maintain aircraft control using backup systems while computing navigation vectors, fuel consumption rates, and emergency landing coordinates without the assistance of computerized flight management systems Sofia had encountered similar situations during her second deployment to Afghanistan, when her helicopter had suffered multiple system failures while evacuating wounded soldiers from a landing zone under enemy fire. The difference was that real combat situations provided adrenaline and genuine motivation to succeed, while simulation exercises offered only the artificial pressure of academic evaluation. She also spent time reviewing the technical specifications of the Academy's flight simulators, understanding that success would depend not just on flying skills, but on familiarity with the specific equipment she would be operating. Combat experience was valuable, but it had to be adapted to the particular demands of the simulation environment. At 13:30 hours, Sofia made her way to Flight Simulator Bay 3, where she found a crowd that exceeded her expectations. Not just her 11 classmates, but several Academy instructors, senior staff members, and even a few pilots from advanced training cohorts had gathered to witness her attempt at the impossible exercise. Commander Harrison stood near the simulator control station, wearing the expression of someone anticipating a particularly satisfying victory. He had positioned himself where he could observe both Sofia's performance and the reactions of the assembled audience, clearly planning to use her failure as a teaching moment about the dangers of overconfidence. "Attention on deck," someone called, as Sofia entered the simulator bay, and the assembled crowd came to military attention out of respect for her combat decorations rather than her Academy status. The gesture was professional courtesy, but Sofia noticed Harrison's expression darken at the sign of respect she was receiving. "Captain Martinez," Harrison announced with theatrical volume, "are you prepared to demonstrate the capabilities that earned you admission to this academy?" Sofia approached the simulator console, conducting her standard pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments. Her hands moved across the control panels with practiced efficiency, each switch and dial verified according to protocols that had been drilled into her through years of operational flying. The simulator cockpit was State-of-the-art equipment. Far more advanced than the aircraft she had flown in combat zones, but the fundamental principles remained the same. Aircraft control was about understanding physics, managing energy, and maintaining situational awareness regardless of the specific equipment involved. "The exercise will begin in 60 seconds, Harrison announced through the intercom system. "Remember, Captain, this isn't a combat zone where survival is the only standard. Academic excellence requires precision and adherence to proper procedures." Sofia secured herself in the simulator harness and activated the pre-flight checklist. Her breathing steady and controlled. Around the simulator bay, she could see her classmates and instructors positioning themselves for optimal viewing angles, their expressions ranging from curious anticipation to barely concealed skepticism. Lieutenant Ryan Cooper caught her eye through the simulator's canopy and offered a subtle thumbs-up gesture. At least one person in the room was hoping for her success rather than her failure. The moment the exercise began, Sofia's hands moved with the mechanical precision that spoke of extensive, real-world experience under genuine life-threatening conditions. The initial flight parameters were routine, requiring basic navigation and communication procedures that any qualified pilot could handle without difficulty. At minute 3, the primary engine failure alarm sounded, and Sofia's response was immediate and decisive. Emergency procedures executed in perfect sequence. Backup systems activated within optimal time windows. Aircraft attitude maintained despite the sudden loss of primary power. Her actions were so smooth that several observers initially assumed the simulation had malfunctioned. The navigation system failure at minute 5 required manual calculations while managing the ongoing engine emergency. Sofia's hands moved between flight controls and navigation instruments with practiced efficiency, computing course corrections and fuel consumption rates, using mental arithmetic while maintaining precise aircraft control. When the hydraulic pressure loss occurred at minute 7, creating a triple emergency scenario that had defeated countless previous candidates, Sofia's response demonstrated why combat experience was irreplaceable. She had managed similar equipment failures while taking enemy fire, where mistakes meant death rather than academic embarrassment. The communication equipment failure at minute 9 completed the exercise's full catastrophic scenario, requiring Sofia to navigate to an emergency landing site using visual references and manual calculations, while managing multiple ongoing system failures. This was the point where even experienced academy graduates typically lost situational awareness and terminated the exercise. Sofia's hands never hesitated. Navigation calculations completed with mathematical precision. Emergency landing approach executed according to optimal flight path parameters. All backup systems managed within acceptable performance ranges. She maintained aircraft control through the full 14-minute scenario without a single procedural violation or safety margin. Excursion. The simulation completion signal sounded at exactly 14 minutes, indicating successful exercise completion. Sofia had achieved what the Academy classified as nearly impossible, a perfect execution of the Viper protocol with 0 penalties assessed, and no system violations recorded. The silence that followed was deafening. Through the simulator bays, observation windows, Sofia could see Commander Harrison standing motionless, his expression frozen somewhere between shock and disbelief. The assembled crowd of pilots and instructors stared at the simulation results display, which showed performance metrics that exceeded optimal parameters in every measurable category. Sergeant Kevin Brooks, the senior simulation technician, approached Harrison with obvious confusion. "Commander, these readings can't be correct," he said quietly. "She achieved performance scores that exceed our calibration standards for the exercise." Sofia calmly unstrapped herself from the simulator harness, conducted her post-flight shutdown procedures with professional composure, and exited the cockpit. Without making any verbal comment about her performance, or seeking recognition for what she had accomplished. But every person in that simulator, they understood that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The combat veteran had not only completed the Academy's most challenging exercise, she had made it look routine. The dynamics of the entire training program had shifted in 14 minutes, and everyone present understood that their assumptions about Sofia Martinez had been completely wrong. Harrison's beauty salon comment suddenly seemed not just inappropriate, but laughably ignorant. The aftermath of Sofia's flawless execution of the Viper protocol created an atmosphere at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy that felt like the calm before a thunderstorm. For exactly 18 hours, she experienced something resembling normal treatment from her classmates and instructors. Conversations in the dining facility included her naturally. Training schedules were distributed without obvious omissions, and even Commander Harrison seemed to maintain professional courtesy during routine interactions. But Sofia had survived too many hostile environments to mistake temporary quiet for genuine peace. She recognized the signs of someone planning retaliation, and Harrison's forced pleasantness felt more dangerous than his obvious hostility had been. The first sign of trouble appeared during Thursday morning's flight theory seminar. Professor Elizabeth Carter was reviewing advanced aerodynamics principles when Harrison entered the classroom and whispered something to her that caused her expression to shift from professional focus to obvious discomfort. "Captain Martinez, Professor," Carter announced reluctantly, "I'm afraid there's been an administrative issue with your security clearance. You'll need to report to the Academy Administrative Office immediately to resolve the problem." Sofia gathered her materials and left the classroom, aware that her classmates were watching with expressions of confusion rather than hostility. Whatever Harrison was planning, it wasn't obvious enough to implicate her fellow pilots in his campaign. The administrative office was located in the Academy's main building, and Sofia found herself waiting in an uncomfortable plastic chair for nearly an hour before anyone acknowledged her presence. When Administrative Specialist Janet Morrison finally called her name, her expression suggested she was following orders she disagreed with. "Captain Martinez, we've received notification that your access to classified training materials requires additional verification," Morrison explained, sliding a thick folder across her desk. "Unfortunately, the verification process typically takes 4 to 6 weeks to complete." Sofia reviewed the paperwork, noting that the security review request was dated 2 days earlier, but had apparently been processed with unusual speed. "Is this a routine procedure for all Academy students?" she asked. Morrison's expression answered the question before her words did. "Not exactly routine, no. But the request came through proper channels, so we have to process it according to regulations." The timing was precisely calculated. Sofia's security clearance suspension would prevent her from accessing the technical materials needed for next week's advanced combat maneuvering course, creating an academic gap that could be used to question her program participation later. When Sofia returned to the classroom, Professor Carter avoided making eye contact, and the lesson continued without any reference to her absence or the material she had missed. The message was clear: administrative problems were Sofia's responsibility to resolve, regardless of their impact on her academic progress. During lunch, Lieutenant Ryan Cooper approached her table with obvious concern. "What was that about this morning?" he asked, keeping his voice low enough to avoid attracting attention from other pilots. "Security clearance verification," Sofia replied, cutting into her regulation meatloaf with more force than necessary. "Apparently it's a routine procedure that takes 4 to 6 weeks. Ryan's expression suggested he understood the implications. 4 to 6 weeks puts you behind on at least 3 major training modules, he said. "That's not coincidence, Sofia. That's deliberate sabotage." Sofia appreciated Ryan's support, but she had encountered institutional resistance before. "Harrison's testing boundaries," she explained. seeing how far he can push administrative harassment without creating documentation that would support a formal complaint. What Sofia didn't realize was that Harrison's campaign was more comprehensive than simple administrative delays. That afternoon, she discovered that her assigned study partner for the advanced navigation course had been reassigned to work with another pilot, leaving her without access to collaborative learning opportunities that other students took for granted. When she inquired about joining a different study group, she was told that all partnerships had been finalized and couldn't be modified without disrupting the entire class structure. The explanation was reasonable enough to avoid obvious discrimination, but the result was systematic isolation from the informal learning networks that helped Academy students succeed. By Friday morning, Sofia realized that Harrison had implemented a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to undermine her academic performance without creating evidence of deliberate retaliation. Her security clearance problems prevented access to crucial materials, her study group exclusion limited collaborative learning opportunities, and subtle scheduling conflicts kept her from attending optional technical seminars that provided competitive advantages to other students. The beauty of Harrison's approach was its plausible deniability. Every individual obstacle could be explained as routine administrative procedure or unfortunate coincidence. Only when viewed as a pattern did the systematic nature of the harassment become apparent. During Friday afternoon's flight training session, Sofia noticed that her assigned aircraft had been scheduled for maintenance inspection immediately after her practice period, preventing her from conducting the additional training time that other pilots routinely received. When she mentioned the scheduling conflict to the maintenance chief, he shrugged apologetically and explained that maintenance schedules were determined by aircraft availability rather than training convenience. "Sorry, Captain," Maintenance Chief Rodriguez said, genuinely seeming to regret the situation. "I don't control the scheduling system. It's all computerized now." Sofia suspected that Harrison had considerable influence over computerized scheduling systems, but proving deliberate manipulation would require access to administrative records that were far above her security clearance level. The systematic exclusion was beginning to affect her academic standing in measurable ways. Missing classified technical briefings meant she was operating with incomplete information during practical exercises. Lack of study group access reduced her preparation time for written examinations. Limited aircraft availability prevented her from building the flight hours that other students accumulated through additional practice sessions. By the end of her first week at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy, Sofia had gone from being the pilot who perfectly executed the impossible Viper protocol to being the student who was falling behind in multiple training categories due to administrative complications beyond her control. Harrison's strategy was psychologically sophisticated. Rather than attacking Sofia's competence directly, he was systematically removing the resources she needed to demonstrate that competence, creating a paper trail that would show declining performance rather than deliberate sabotage. The most frustrating aspect was that Sofia's classmates were beginning to notice her struggles without understanding their cause. During casual conversations, several pilots mentioned that she seemed to be having difficulty keeping up with the program's demands, unaware that her challenges were artificially manufactured rather than naturally occurring. Lieutenant Ryan Cooper remained supportive, but even he was starting to express concern about Sofia's apparent academic difficulties. "Maybe you should talk to someone about getting additional tutoring support," he suggested after she missed another technical briefing due to security clearance complications. Sofia realized that Harrison's campaign was working exactly as intended. Her reputation was shifting from exceptional combat veteran to struggling academic student, and the change was happening gradually enough that most observers attributed her difficulties to personal limitations rather than institutional harassment. Sofia Martinez hadn't survived 3 combat deployments by accepting defeat when facing superior forces. Harrison's administrative warfare was sophisticated, But it had one crucial weakness. It depended on her accepting the role of victim, rather than fighting back through proper channels. It was time to remind Harrison that combat veterans understand something about warfare that academy instructors never learn. The most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to surrender, regardless of how overwhelming the opposition appears to be. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Week 2 at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy brought escalations that made Harrison's previous harassment look subtle by comparison. Sofia arrived Monday morning to discover that her dormitory assignment had been changed due to facility maintenance requirements that necessitated her relocation to temporary quarters in a different building, isolating her from the informal evening study sessions that her classmates conducted in the main residential facility. The new accommodations were technically adequate according to military housing standards, but they were located nearly a mile from the main academy complex, requiring Sofia to wake up 30 minutes earlier than other students to arrive on time for morning briefings. The extra travel time also prevented her from participating in the voluntary physical training sessions that many pilots use to build camaraderie and share academic insights. When Sofia inquired about the timeline for returning to regular housing, Administrative Specialist Morrison explained that maintenance schedules were determined by facilities management and couldn't be expedited for individual convenience. The explanation was reasonable enough to avoid obvious discrimination, but the result was another layer of systematic isolation. Tuesday brought the discovery that Sofia's scores on the previous week's written examinations had been flagged for statistical anomaly review by the Academy's Academic Standards Committee. Her test performance had been exceptional, ranking in the top 10% of all students, but the review process required her to retake the examinations under supervised conditions to verify the authenticity of her results. It's purely a procedural matter, Professor Carter explained with obvious discomfort during their private meeting. Sometimes when students perform significantly above expected levels, we need to verify that the results reflect individual capabilities rather than unauthorized assistance. The implication was carefully constructed to avoid direct accusation while questioning Sofia's academic integrity. She would have to spend additional hours retaking examinations she had already passed with distinction, time that other students could use for advanced preparation or collaborative study. Sofia maintained her professional composure during the meeting, but internally she recognized the escalating pattern. Harrison was systematically attacking every aspect of her academy experience: housing, academic resources, social integration, and now her intellectual capabilities. Wednesday morning brought the most serious escalation yet. Sofia arrived at flight training to discover that her instructor pilot assignment had been changed from Captain Michael Torres, a respected combat veteran with extensive teaching experience, to Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh, a recent academy graduate with minimal flight hours and no combat experience. The reassignment was explained as a better personality match that would provide Sofia with instruction more suited to her learning style. But the reality was obvious to anyone familiar with academy operations. Captain Torres was known for his supportive teaching methods and advocacy for student success, while Lieutenant Walsh had a reputation for rigid adherence to regulations and limited patience for students who required additional guidance. During their first training session, Lieutenant Walsh made her expectations clear. "Captain Martinez, I understand you have extensive combat experience, but this program requires precision and adherence to established procedures rather than improvisation and survival instincts," she announced before they had even entered the aircraft. The comment was a direct echo of Harrison's earlier statements about combat habits being incompatible with academic excellence. And Sofia realized that Walsh was either following specific instructions or had been carefully briefed about the approach she should take with her new student. The flight training session was deliberately challenging. with Walsh providing minimal guidance while expecting Sofia to demonstrate mastery of techniques that had been covered in the classified briefings she had been prevented from attending. When Sofia asked for clarification about specific procedures, Walsh responded with barely concealed impatience. "These fundamentals should be second nature by now, Captain," Walsh said through the aircraft intercom. "Perhaps you should consider additional study time to bring yourself up to program standards." The psychological pressure was sophisticated and relentless. Sofia was being systematically isolated from resources, while simultaneously being criticized for not meeting standards that required access to those same resources. Harrison had created a perfect trap. Failure to perform would be attributed to her inadequacies, while requests for assistance would be interpreted as evidence of those inadequacies. Thursday brought news that Sofia's security clearance review had been extended due to complications in the verification process that would delay resolution for an additional 4 to 6 weeks. The extension notice was delivered with apologetic explanations about bureaucratic inefficiency, but the timing coincided perfectly with the Academy's Advanced Weapons Systems training module. Without proper clearance, Sofia would be excluded from the technical briefings that covered targeting systems, electronic warfare capabilities, and classified tactical procedures that comprised nearly 40% of the Academy's core curriculum. The academic gap would become insurmountable, providing Harrison with documented justification for questioning her program participation. During Thursday evening, Sofia made a decision that would change everything. She walked to the Academy's communications center and placed a secure call to Colonel Sarah Mitchell, her former commanding officer from her last combat deployment. If Harrison wanted to escalate the conflict, Sofia was prepared to remind him that combat veterans have extensive networks of mutual support. "Sofia," Colonel Mitchell said warmly when the call connected, "how's life treating you at the fancy flight academy?" "It's complicated, Colonel," Sofia replied carefully, aware that military communications were monitored. "I could use some guidance about proper procedures for addressing administrative issues that might be affecting academic performance." Colonel Mitchell's tone immediately became more serious. She had commanded combat operations long enough to recognize coded language about institutional problems. "Tell me everything," she said. Sofia provided a careful summary of the systematic harassment she had experienced, focusing on documented facts rather than personal interpretations. The security clearance delays, housing reassignments, instructor changes, and examination reviews that had created a pattern of manufactured obstacles. "Sofia, what you're describing isn't administrative inefficiency," Colonel Mitchell said after listening to the complete account. "That's deliberate retaliation, and it violates multiple military regulations regarding equal treatment and training access." Colonel Mitchell's analysis confirmed Sofia's suspicions while providing something even more valuable: specific knowledge about the regulatory framework that governed military training programs and the formal procedures for addressing institutional misconduct. "I'm going to give you contact information for someone who specializes in these situations," Colonel Mitchell continued. "Major Lisa Thompson in the Inspector General's office. She handles cases involving training program discrimination and command misconduct." Friday morning brought Harrison's most aggressive move yet. Sofia was called to his office for what he described as a performance review meeting to discuss her academic progress and program suitability. Harrison's office was designed to intimidate, with walls covered in commendations, photographs with senior military officials, and aircraft models representing every advanced system the Academy operated. Sofia sat in the uncomfortable metal chair across from his desk while he reviewed a thick folder that supposedly contained documentation of her performance deficiencies. "Captain Martinez," Harrison began with false concern, "I've been monitoring your progress since arriving at this academy, and I'm afraid there are some serious issues we need to address." He opened the folder to reveal a carefully constructed collection of documents. The security clearance delays she couldn't control, the missed training sessions caused by administrative obstacles, the housing complications that isolated her from study opportunities, and the instructor concerns about her supposed difficulty adapting to academic standards. While your simulation performance was adequate, Harrison continued, there are concerning patterns in your overall integration. With this program, multiple instructors have reported difficulties with your responsiveness to feedback, and your academic performance has been inconsistent. Every accusation was a deliberate distortion of the systematic exclusion she had experienced, but Harrison had documented everything in language that created the appearance of legitimate performance concerns rather than institutional harassment. I'm recommending your immediate transfer to a different training program, Harrison announced, sliding official paperwork across his desk. Something more appropriate for your particular skill set. The Tactical Support Division has an opening for logistics coordination that might be better suited to your capabilities. The insult was perfectly crafted. Logistics coordination was essential military work, but transfer from elite pilot training to support operations would effectively end Sofia's career advancement permanently. Everyone would understand that she had been unable to handle the demands of advanced aviation training. But as Sofia looked at Harrison's confident expression and the transfer papers that would destroy her future, she realized he had made one crucial mistake. He had assumed she would accept defeat quietly, like the other pilots he had systematically destroyed over the years. Sofia Martinez had spent 8 years learning that the most dangerous battles are often won not through superior firepower, but through superior preparation and the courage to use every available weapon in your arsenal. Harrison was about to discover that some wars are fought in courtrooms and investigation offices rather than cockpits and briefing rooms. Sofia didn't sleep much Friday night. Instead, she sat at the small desk in her isolated temporary quarters, methodically reviewing every interaction, every document, and every witness to Harrison's systematic campaign against her, her combat. Deployment experience had taught her that successful operations required meticulous intelligence gathering and precise execution, and building a formal complaint would demand the same level of professional preparation. Colonel Mitchell had provided her with specific guidance about military regulations and the documentation standards required for Inspector General investigations. Equal access to training opportunities, fair evaluation based on performance metrics, protection from retaliation for excellence, and prohibition of discriminatory treatment based on gender or background were all clearly established in military policy. Sofia began by creating a detailed timeline that revealed the pattern of Harrison's behavior. The beauty salon comment on her first day, the early Viper protocol challenge designed to humiliate her, the security clearance delays that began immediately after her perfect performance, and the escalating administrative harassment that had systematically isolated her from academy resources. Each incident was documented with dates, times, witnesses present, and exact quotes whenever possible. Sofia's military training had emphasized the importance of thorough record keeping, and she approached the complaint preparation with the same precision she had used for combat mission reports. The most crucial element was establishing that Harrison's treatment of her was both systematic and discriminatory. Individual incidents could be explained as administrative coincidence or personality conflicts, but the timeline revealed a clear pattern of retaliation that began the moment she demonstrated superior capabilities. Saturday morning, Sofia received an unexpected visitor. Lieutenant Ryan Cooper knocked on her temporary quarters door, holding a manila envelope and wearing an expression of obvious concern. "Sofia, I've been thinking about everything that's happened since you arrived here," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "What Harrison's doing isn't just unprofessional. It's illegal." Ryan handed her the envelope, which contained photocopies of academy training schedules, housing assignments, and instructor allocations that documented the systematic nature of her exclusion. "I work part-time in the administrative office," he explained. "I've seen how decisions get made around here, and what's happening to you isn't normal procedure." The documents Ryan provided were invaluable evidence. They showed that Sofia's security clearance review had been expedited rather than delayed, that her housing reassignment had been requested by Harrison personally, and that her instructor change had been implemented despite Captain Torres's objections. "Why are you risking this?" Sofia asked, understanding that providing her with confidential administrative documents could damage Ryan's career prospects. "Because what happened to you is going to happen to other people if someone doesn't stop it," Ryan replied grimly. "Harrison's been doing this for years. You're just the first person who's been strong enough to fight back properly." Ryan's support provided Sofia with something even more valuable than documentation: witness testimony from someone with access to the administrative processes that Harrison had manipulated. A fellow pilot's testimony would carry significant weight during any formal investigation. Sunday afternoon, Sofia made the most important phone call of her military career. Major Lisa Thompson in the Inspector General's office answered on the second ring, and her voice carried the professional competence of someone who had handled similar cases many times before. "Major Thompson, my name is Captain Sofia Martinez, and I need guidance about filing a formal complaint regarding systematic discrimination and retaliation at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy," Sofia began. "Tell me everything," Thompson replied, and Sofia spent the next hour providing a comprehensive account of Harrison's campaign against her. The beauty salon comment, the impossible challenge, her perfect performance, and the escalating harassment that had followed her demonstration of superior capabilities. Thompson listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification about specific dates or requesting additional details about particular incidents. Her questions demonstrated thorough familiarity with military regulations and the legal standards required for substantiating discrimination complaints. "Captain Martinez, what you're describing constitutes multiple violations of military anti-discrimination policies," Thompson said after reviewing Sofia's account. "The pattern of retaliation following your exceptional performance creates a strong case for systematic harassment based on gender discrimination." Thompson explained the formal complaint process, which would trigger a comprehensive investigation into Harrison's conduct and the Academy's administrative practices. The investigation would include interviews with all Academy personnel, review of administrative records, and examination of training protocols to determine whether systematic discrimination was occurring. "However," Thompson continued, "I want you to understand that filing this complaint will likely result in intense scrutiny of your own performance and motivations. Some people will view you as a troublemaker regardless of the investigation's outcome." "Major, I've been shot at by people who wanted to kill me," Sofia replied. "I can handle whatever consequences come from doing the right thing." Thompson's approval was evident in her tone. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. I'm going to send you the formal complaint forms and documentation requirements. This needs to be comprehensive and precise, because Harrison will have legal representation and institutional support." Monday morning brought a development that confirmed Sofia's decision to fight back through official channels. She arrived at morning briefing to discover that another female pilot, Captain Maria Vasquez, had been assigned to the Academy's next training cohort. Harrison's expression when he reviewed the new student roster suggested he was already planning his next campaign. During a brief conversation after the briefing, Captain Vasquez mentioned that she had heard about Sofia's difficulties adjusting to Academy standards and hoped to avoid similar problems. During her own training, Sofia realized that Harrison's narrative about her supposed inadequacies was already being spread to incoming students, creating a psychological framework that would make future harassment seem justified rather than discriminatory. Her case wasn't just about personal vindication. It was about preventing other qualified pilots from facing the same systematic destruction. Tuesday evening, Sofia completed her formal complaint documentation. The package included 43 pages of detailed incident reports, witness statements from Ryan Cooper and 2 other Academy personnel who had observed Harrison's behavior, copies of administrative documents that demonstrated the systematic nature of her exclusion, and a comprehensive analysis of military regulations that Harrison had violated. The complaint was supported by technical evidence from Sergeant Kevin Brooks, the senior simulation technician, who had provided performance data from the Viper protocol exercise along with historical records showing that Harrison himself had never successfully completed the simulation that Sofia had executed perfectly. "I've been working these systems for 15 years, Brooks had told Sofia during their confidential meeting. "I've never seen performance scores like yours, and I've never seen a commander deliberately sabotage a pilot who demonstrated that level of capability." Brooks's testimony was particularly damaging to Harrison's position because it established that his treatment of Sofia was motivated by personal humiliation rather than legitimate performance concerns. A commanding officer who couldn't complete an exercise that his student had mastered perfectly had clear motivation for retaliation. Wednesday morning, Sofia uploaded her complete complaint package to the Inspector General's secure filing system. The automated response indicated that her case had been assigned number IG-2024-1247 and that a full investigation would be launched within 72 hours, with preliminary findings expected within 30 days. Harrison had 48 hours remaining before his carefully constructed campaign against Sofia would be subjected to official scrutiny by investigators who specialized in uncovering exactly the kind of systematic harassment he had implemented. The transfer papers he had prepared for her were about to become evidence in his own professional destruction. As Sofia walked across the Academy campus that evening, she felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: genuine optimism. Harrison had taught her an important lesson about institutional warfare, but he had forgotten that combat veterans possess something that Academy instructors never develop: the absolute certainty that some battles are worth fighting regardless of personal cost. The war was about to begin, and Sofia had spent her entire career learning how to win wars against superior forces through superior preparation and unwavering determination. The Inspector General's team arrived at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy on a Tuesday morning that would forever divide the institution's history into before and after. They came quietly, without fanfare or advance warning, but word spread through the facility with the efficiency of a military communications network. By 0900 hours, every pilot, instructor, and staff member knew that outside investigators were conducting interviews and reviewing training records. Major Lisa Thompson led the investigation team with the methodical precision of someone who had uncovered institutional misconduct many times before. Her team included a military attorney specializing in discrimination cases, a forensic analyst for administrative records, and a senior pilot with extensive experience in training program evaluation. They were not Academy personnel. They answered to no one at Skyline, and they possessed the authority to examine any document or interview any person necessary to determine the truth. Harrison's confident demeanor began showing cracks. By midday Tuesday, Sofia watched from across the Academy dining facility as he fielded multiple phone calls, his voice rising with each conversation. His usual commanding presence was replaced by barely controlled anxiety, and he had canceled all scheduled training exercises to lock himself in his office with the Academy's legal officer. Investigators established their operations center in the Academy's main conference room, and the steady stream of personnel being called for interviews created an atmosphere of barely contained tension throughout the facility. Sofia had been interviewed first, spending 3 hours providing detailed testimony about Harrison's systematic campaign against her. "Your documentation is exceptionally thorough," Major Thompson noted during their session, reviewing the comprehensive timeline Sofia had prepared. Most complaints we receive are based on general grievances or personal conflicts. This reads like an intelligence briefing. Sofia had learned during her combat deployments that details matter, especially when lives are on the line. I approach this the same way I would approach any mission-critical operation, she replied. With complete preparation and precise execution. Thompson's expression suggested she understood the implications. This wasn't about hurt feelings or personality conflicts. It was about systematic abuse of command authority that could compromise military readiness and institutional integrity. The investigators interviewed every pilot in Sofia's training cohort, all academy instructors, and several administrative staff members. Lieutenant Ryan Cooper provided detailed witness testimony about the systematic exclusion he had observed, along with the administrative documents that proved Harrison's deliberate manipulation of academy resources. Most damaging to Harrison's position was the technical testimony from Sergeant Kevin Brooks. The senior simulation technician had brought comprehensive performance data that demonstrated Sofia's exceptional capabilities while documenting Harrison's own repeated failures at exercises he used to evaluate other pilots. Captain Martinez achieved performance scores that exceeded our calibration standards, Brooks explained to the investigators. In 15 years of operating these systems, I've never recorded results like hers. Meanwhile, Commander Harrison has failed the Viper protocol multiple times, most recently during his own annual proficiency evaluation. The contrast between Harrison's public ridicule of Sofia's abilities and his own documented incompetence created a clear pattern of projection and retaliation that even the most sympathetic observer couldn't dismiss as coincidence. Wednesday brought revelations that expanded the investigation far beyond Sofia's individual case. Captain Maria Vasquez, the newly assigned female pilot, came forward with information that Harrison had already begun implementing similar tactics against her during her first week at the academy. He made comments about my appearance during the initial briefing, Vasquez told the investigators. Then he assigned me to the same isolated housing that Captain Martinez had been forced into, claiming it was temporary due to maintenance issues. The pattern was identical to Harrison's treatment of Sofia, suggesting that his discriminatory behavior was systematic rather than personal. The investigators discovered that 2 previous female pilots had been quietly transferred out of the academy after experiencing similar harassment. Their departures attributed to academic difficulties that had actually been manufactured through the same administrative warfare Harrison had used against Sofia. Thursday afternoon brought the discovery that would ultimately destroy Harrison's career. During their review of administrative records, the investigators found email communications between Harrison and several academy instructors that revealed the coordinated nature of his campaign against Sofia. We need to ensure that combat veterans understand the academic standards required for success at this institution, Harrison had written to Lieutenant Walsh before her assignment as Sofia's flight instructor. Some pilots mistake survival instincts for precision flying, and it's our responsibility to maintain program integrity. The email trail documented Harrison's instructions to various staff members about limiting Sofia's access to resources, creating artificial obstacles to her academic progress, and ensuring that her performance difficulties were properly documented for future reference. The communications proved beyond doubt that her treatment had been deliberate and coordinated rather than coincidental. Most revealing was an email Harrison had sent to the Academy's administrative officer. The Martinez situation requires careful handling. Her simulation performance was unexpected, but we can't allow one lucky exercise to overshadow the broader concerns about integrating combat veterans into academic environments. The language revealed Harrison's real motivation. Sofia's perfect execution of the Viper protocol had humiliated him publicly, and his subsequent actions were motivated by personal revenge rather than legitimate program administration. By Thursday evening, Harrison had been called to an emergency meeting with the Academy commander and the investigating team. He emerged an hour later looking like he had aged 10 years, his usual arrogant confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. Word spread quickly through unofficial channels that Harrison had been relieved of his command responsibilities pending the investigation's outcome. His access to student records had been revoked, his authority over training assignments suspended, and his future at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy effectively terminated. The interim Academy commander, Colonel James Patterson, called an all-hands meeting Thursday evening. His message was brief but unmistakable. Effective immediately, all training assignments will be based solely on performance metrics and program requirements. Any instructor found engaging in discriminatory or retaliatory behavior will face immediate disciplinary action and possible criminal charges. Patterson looked directly at Sofia as he continued. Every pilot in this program earned their place here through demonstrated excellence and dedication. That's the only standard that matters, and it's the only standard we'll use moving forward. For the first time in weeks, Sofia felt like she could breathe freely at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy. The systematic isolation was over, her security clearance complications had been mysteriously resolved, and she was officially restored to full participation in all training activities. But the most satisfying moment came Friday morning, when Harrison began clearing out his office. As he carried his personal belongings to his car, he had to walk past the flight simulator bay where Sofia was conducting her regular training session. The same simulator where she had executed the Viper protocol perfectly, exposing his incompetence and triggering the investigation that was destroying his career. Sofia didn't look up from her pre-flight checklist as he passed, but she knew he was watching. Sometimes the most powerful victories are achieved not through dramatic confrontations, but through the simple act of continuing to excel while your opponents destroy themselves through their own misconduct. Harrison's beauty salon comment had become the catalyst for his professional downfall. And Sofia had proven that excellence properly demonstrated and professionally defended could overcome any form of institutional prejudice. The investigation was far from complete, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Harrison had lost his war against Sofia Martinez not because she was stronger or more ruthless, but because she had fought by the rules while he had broken them. The Inspector General's preliminary findings were released 3 weeks later through official military channels, and the document was devastating in its clinical precision. 28 pages of carefully documented evidence revealed a pattern of systematic discrimination, abuse of command authority, and deliberate violation of military regulations that had affected multiple personnel over a 4-year period. Major Thompson's investigation had uncovered evidence that Harrison's misconduct extended far beyond Sofia's case. The forensic analysis of administrative records revealed that 6 previous pilots had been subjected to similar harassment, with 4 of them quietly transferred out of the academy after experiencing manufactured academic difficulties that had nothing to do with their actual capabilities. The report noted that Harrison's pattern of retaliatory behavior and professional incompetence made him unsuitable for positions involving personnel management or advanced training responsibilities. More significantly, the investigation had identified institutional failures at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy that had allowed Harrison's misconduct to continue unchallenged for years. The evidence demonstrates systematic discrimination based on gender, retaliation against personnel who demonstrated superior performance, and deliberate manipulation of administrative processes to manufacture apparent academic deficiencies. The report stated with bureaucratic precision that couldn't hide the severity of the accusations. Harrison was formally relieved of duty and reassigned to a desk position at a supply depot in North Dakota, effectively ending his career in military aviation training. The reassignment was permanent, with notation in his service record that he was unsuitable for command positions, roles involving personnel evaluation. The investigation had also revealed the most damaging evidence of all: Harrison's complete failure to meet the performance standards he used to evaluate other pilots. Technical analysis of simulation records showed that he had never successfully completed the Viper protocol, despite requiring the exercise from students and using their performance on it to determine program advancement. Commander Harrison attempted the Viper protocol simulation exercise 7 times over a 3-year period. The report documented all attempts resulted in exercise termination due to procedural violations, equipment handling errors, or inability to manage multiple emergency scenarios within acceptable time parameters. The contrast between Harrison's public criticism of Sofia's capabilities and his own documented failures created an undeniable pattern of hypocrisy and projection that destroyed any remaining credibility he might have possessed. Sergeant Kevin Brooks's technical testimony had been particularly damaging. His detailed analysis of simulation data proved that Sofia's performance exceeded not just Harrison's capabilities, but the scores achieved by 96% of all pilots who had attempted the exercise over the past 5 years. Captain Martinez achieved performance metrics that required recalibration of our evaluation standards, Brooks had told the investigators. Her execution was flawless in every measurable category, while Commander Harrison's attempts were consistently substandard even by basic competency requirements. The military aviation community is small, and word of Harrison's disgrace spread quickly through professional networks. His reputation as an elite instructor was replaced by whispered stories about the commander who had been exposed as incompetent by the combat veteran he had tried to destroy. Sofia was officially commended for her exceptional courage in reporting misconduct and her unwavering commitment to military standards of professional excellence. The commendation was signed by the Inspector General himself and included language about her distinguished service in combat zones and exemplary performance in advanced training environments. But the recognition that meant the most to Sofia came from an unexpected source. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, her former commanding officer, called personally to congratulate her on the investigation's outcome. "Sofia, what you did at Skyline took more courage than anything you faced in combat," Mitchell said during their conversation. "Fighting institutional discrimination requires a different kind of bravery, and you've opened doors for every woman who'll train at that academy in the future." The institutional changes at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy were comprehensive and immediate. New oversight procedures were implemented for performance evaluation. Mandatory training was instituted for all instructional staff regarding discrimination prevention, and external review processes were established to prevent future abuse of administrative authority. Most importantly, the Academy's culture had been fundamentally transformed. Harrison's removal sent a clear message throughout military aviation that excellence would be recognized and rewarded regardless of demographics, while prejudice and abuse of authority would be swiftly punished. The new Academy commander, Colonel Patricia Williams, had been specifically selected for her experience in creating inclusive training environments and her reputation for merit-based evaluation standards. Her first official act was to establish the Excellence Protocol, a comprehensive system ensuring that every pilot received equal training opportunities and fair assessment based solely on documented performance metrics. Sofia's classmates, who had initially been uncertain about her qualifications, now treated her with the genuine respect that comes from witnessing someone achieve what they knew was beyond their own capabilities. The dynamics of professional relationships had shifted permanently, based on demonstrated competence rather than preconceived assumptions. Lieutenant Ryan Cooper, who had risked his career to provide witness testimony, was officially recognized for his courage in reporting misconduct. His willingness to support Sofia's case despite potential consequences had demonstrated the kind of moral leadership that military institutions needed to maintain their Integrity. Captain Maria Vasquez, who had come forward about Harrison's early harassment of her, was able to complete her training without facing the systematic sabotage that had nearly destroyed Sofia's academy experience. Her success proved that the institutional changes were producing real results rather than cosmetic improvements. The most revealing aspect of the investigation's aftermath was Harrison's complete inability to find another position within military aviation training. Despite his years of experience and previous reputation, no commander wanted to risk hiring someone whose professional judgment had been so thoroughly discredited. His reassignment to supply depot operations was viewed throughout the military as appropriate justice for someone who had abused his authority to destroy qualified personnel. The position offered no opportunities for advancement, no access to pilot training programs, and no chance to rebuild his reputation within military aviation. 3 months after the investigation's conclusion, Sofia received a package with no return address. Inside was a group photograph of Skyline Advanced Flight Academy's current training cohort, 14 pilots of different backgrounds, genders, and experience levels, all wearing their flight suits with obvious pride and confidence. A handwritten note was attached. Captain Martinez, this is what Skyline looks like now. Professional, merit-based, focused on excellence rather than politics. Thank you for showing us that fighting back isn't about revenge, it's about making sure the next person doesn't have to fight the same battles. Your legacy here isn't just one perfect simulation run. It's a training program that actually develops the best pilots, regardless of who they are or where they come from. The note was signed by the entire class of 2025. Sofia smiled as she placed the photograph on her office wall next to her combat deployment certificates and squadron commendations. Harrison's attempt to destroy her had instead transformed an entire institution, creating opportunities for future generations of pilots who would never know they owed their fair treatment to a combat veteran who had refused to accept injustice. Quietly. Sometimes the most important victories aren't measured in personal advancement, but in the doors they open for everyone who follows. 6 months after Commander Harrison's professional destruction, Captain Sofia Martinez stood at attention in the Academy's main auditorium as Colonel Patricia Williams pinned the Advanced Flight Integration Completion Certificate to her uniform. The same program Harrison had tried to force her out of, the same academy where he had publicly humiliated her with his beauty salon comment, had become the site of her complete vindication. The ceremony was attended by the full academy staff, Sofia's graduating class, and several distinguished visitors who had come specifically to witness her achievement. Among them was Major Lisa Thompson from the Inspector General's office, whose investigation had transformed Skyline Advanced Flight Academy from an institution that tolerated discrimination into a model of professional excellence. Captain Martinez, Colonel Williams announced to the assembled audience, has not only completed our most demanding training program with distinction, but has demonstrated the kind of moral courage and professional integrity that exemplifies the best traditions of military aviation. The applause that followed was genuine and sustained, reflecting the respect Sofia had earned not just through her exceptional flying abilities, but through her principled stand against institutional misconduct. Her classmates, who had initially been uncertain about her qualifications, now understood that they had witnessed something historic, the transformation of an entire military culture, through one person's refusal to accept injustice. Lieutenant Ryan Cooper approached her after the ceremony, his expression reflecting both admiration and amazement. "Sofia, you didn't just survive Harrison's sabotage," he said. "You've advanced beyond where you would have been if he'd never interfered with your training." It was true. The investigation had attracted attention from senior command officers throughout military aviation who had reviewed Sofia's complete service record, including her performance at Skyline. Her flawless execution of the Viper protocol, combined with her professional handling of Harrison's harassment, had marked her as exactly the kind of leader Military aviation needed for increasingly complex operational challenges. 2 days after graduation, Sofia received orders that exceeded her highest expectations: promotion to major and assignment as squadron leader for an overseas combat operation. The position represented not just career advancement, but recognition that her capabilities exceeded those of officers with significantly more time in service. The promotion ceremony was conducted by General Patricia Stevens, the same officer whose flight helmet Sofia had admired in the Academy's museum display case. Stevens had specifically requested to conduct the ceremony as a symbol of continuity between generations of military women who had fought for professional recognition. "Major Martinez," General Stevens said as she pinned the new rank insignia to Sofia's uniform, "your actions at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy represent the best traditions of military service: excellence in performance, courage in adversity, and commitment to institutional integrity that makes all of us stronger." The general's words carried special significance because Stevens had faced similar challenges during her own career advancement 30 years earlier. The difference was that Sofia's generation had benefited from formal protections and investigation, procedures that previous women had fought to establish. Sofia's new assignment was with the 47th Combat Aviation Squadron, operating advanced aircraft in support of special operations missions. The position required capabilities that went far beyond technical flying skills, including leadership of 12 experienced pilots, coordination with international military forces, and responsibility for mission-critical operations in hostile environments. The squadron's previous commander had specifically requested Sofia's assignment after reviewing her performance records and the circumstances of her Skyline experience. "We need leaders who can perform under pressure and maintain professional standards regardless of external challenges," he had explained during their initial meeting. Sofia's first month as squadron leader exceeded all expectations. Her combat experience provided credibility with experienced pilots, while her academic excellence demonstrated the analytical capabilities required for complex mission planning. Most importantly, her reputation for principled leadership attracted the kind of respect that couldn't be demanded through rank alone. The transformation in Sofia's career trajectory was remarkable. 2 years earlier, she had been a combat pilot with excellent performance records, but limited prospects for rapid advancement. Harrison's attempt to destroy her had instead created opportunities that might have taken decades to achieve through normal career progression. But Sofia understood that her individual success was less important than the institutional changes her case had created. The new oversight procedures at Skyline Academy were preventing other qualified pilots from facing the systematic harassment that had nearly ended her career. Her example had demonstrated that fighting institutional discrimination was not only possible but could result in positive change for entire organizations. 3 months into her squadron leadership role, Sofia received an unexpected communication from the Pentagon. The Department of Defense was establishing a new task force to review training procedures at all military aviation academies, ensuring that the reforms implemented at Skyline were adopted throughout the service. Sofia was invited to serve as the task force's primary advisor on discrimination prevention and merit-based evaluation standards. The position would involve traveling to military installations worldwide, reviewing training protocols, and implementing policies that would protect future generations of pilots from the kind of treatment she had experienced. The irony was perfect. Harrison's beauty salon comment had triggered a chain of events that would ultimately transform military aviation training throughout the entire Department of Defense. His attempt to humiliate one combat veteran had resulted in systematic improvements that would benefit thousands of future pilots. During a brief leave period, Sofia returned to Skyline Advanced Flight Academy to deliver a guest lecture on leadership under adverse conditions. Walking through the facility where she had faced systematic harassment, just 18 months earlier, felt surreal, particularly when she saw her own photograph displayed in the Academy's Hall of Distinguished Graduates. Current training cohort included 4 women among 16 total students, a demographic change that reflected the Academy's transformation from an institution that barely tolerated female pilots to one that actively recruited the most qualified candidates regardless of gender. After her lecture, one of the female students approached with obvious nervousness. "Major Martinez, I wanted to thank you for what you did here," she said quietly. "When I applied to Skyline, several people told me stories about your experience and how it changed everything. I don't think I would have had the courage to apply if you hadn't fought back the way you did." Sofia felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal recognition. The young pilot represented the future of military aviation, qualified candidates who could focus on developing their capabilities rather than fighting for basic professional respect. That evening, Sofia walked past the flight simulator bay where she had executed the Viper protocol perfectly, triggering Harrison's campaign of retaliation and ultimately transforming an entire institution. The simulator was now being used by students who would never know they owed their fair treatment to one combat veteran's refusal to accept discrimination quietly. Commander Harrison's nameplate had been removed from the Academy buildings, replaced by simple markers indicating functional offices rather than personal domains. His legacy remained only in the form of stronger regulations, better oversight procedures, and institutional memory that would protect future generations of pilots from similar abuse. Sofia's story had become part of military aviation lore, not as a tale of personal triumph over adversity, but as a blueprint for how institutional change could be achieved through courage, preparation, and the systematic use of proper channels to address misconduct. The beauty salon comment that was supposed to humiliate her had instead become the catalyst for transforming military training culture throughout the entire Department of Defense. Sometimes the greatest victories emerge from the most unlikely beginnings, particularly when they're achieved by people who understand that true strength comes from fighting for principles rather than personal advancement. 1 year after her promotion to squadron leader, Major Sofia Martinez received an invitation that would have seemed impossible during her darkest days at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy. The Department of Defense was hosting its annual military aviation leadership conference, and Sofia had been selected as the keynote speaker for an audience of 300 senior officers, training commanders, and policymakers from all service branches. The topic they had requested was professional excellence under adverse conditions, lessons from advanced flight training. But everyone in military aviation understood the real subject would be her transformation of institutional culture through principled resistance to discrimination and abuse of authority. Standing at the podium in the Pentagon's main auditorium, Sofia looked out at an audience that included generals, admirals, and the kind of senior leadership she had once thought would never take her seriously. The irony wasn't lost on her that Harrison's beauty salon comment had ultimately led to this moment, where she would address the military's most influential decision-makers about leadership and institutional integrity. Excellence in military aviation requires more than technical skill, Sofia began, her voice carrying clearly throughout the auditorium. It requires the courage to maintain professional standards even when facing institutional resistance, the wisdom to use proper channels for addressing misconduct, and the persistence to document everything with precision that satisfies legal scrutiny. She paused, allowing her words to settle before continuing with the message that had become her signature theme. "When I executed the Viper protocol at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy, I wasn't trying to prove a point or embarrass anyone. I was simply doing my job to the best of my abilities. But when my competence was met with retaliation rather than recognition, I had a choice: accept the injustice or use the system properly to address it." The audience listened with the focused attention that senior military officers reserved for briefings that could affect their own command responsibilities. Sofia's story had become required reading at several war colleges, but hearing it directly from her carried additional impact. The military has comprehensive regulations protecting personnel from discrimination and retaliation, Sofia continued. Those regulations work, but only when people are brave enough to use them and thorough enough to build cases that can withstand scrutiny. She clicked to her next slide, which displayed statistics about the institutional changes that had followed. Her case. Since the reforms implemented at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy, similar oversight procedures have been adopted at 47 military training facilities. Discrimination complaints are down 63%, not because problems have been hidden better, but because commanders understand that abuse of authority will be swiftly investigated and punished. The numbers represented real change in military culture, transformation that extended far beyond Sofia's individual experience to affect thousands of service members who would never face the systematic harassment she had endured. Most importantly, Sofia said, advancing to a slide that showed graduation statistics from military aviation programs, training effectiveness has improved significantly. When evaluation is based purely on merit rather than demographics or personal prejudice, we identify and develop the most capable pilots regardless of their background. The data was compelling. Female pilot graduation rates had increased 47% since the Skyline reforms, while overall program completion rates had improved across all demographic categories. Excellence, it turned out, was more readily achieved in environments free from discrimination and institutional bias. After her presentation, Sofia was approached by multiple senior officers who wanted guidance on implementing similar oversight procedures at their own facilities. The conversation that meant the most to her came from General Patricia Stevens, who had become an unofficial mentor since conducting Sofia's promotion ceremony. "Sofia, what you've accomplished goes beyond personal vindication," Stevens said during their private meeting. "You've demonstrated that institutional change is possible when individuals have the courage to fight for principles rather than personal advancement." The general's assessment was confirmed by the correspondence Sofia received following her Pentagon presentation. Training commanders from installations worldwide requested copies of the Skyline Academy reforms, along with guidance on adapting the procedures to their specific operational requirements. 6 months later, Sofia received a communication that brought her story full circle. The message was from Lieutenant Sarah Chun, a pilot currently enrolled in the Advanced Flight Integration Program at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy. "Major Martinez," the message began, "you don't know me, but I wanted to thank you for what you did at Skyline. I'm the only woman in my training cohort, and when I arrived, several instructors mentioned your story as an example of what happens when pilots focus on performance rather than politics." Lieutenant Chun went on to describe an academy environment that bore no resemblance to the institution where Sofia had faced systematic harassment. "The culture here is completely professional now," she wrote. "Merit-based evaluation, equal access to training opportunities, and zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior. Today I successfully completed the Viper protocol on my first attempt. When I finished, my instructor said, 'That's Martinez-level execution.' I had to ask what that meant. And he told me about your perfect performance under pressure and how you handled the aftermath with such professionalism." The message concluded with words that validated everything Sofia had endured. "I wanted you to know that your example is inspiring the next generation of pilots to maintain the highest standards, no matter what obstacles they face." The Academy has a new motto posted in the main briefing room: "Excellence knows no boundaries." Everyone here understands that it refers to your legacy. 2 weeks later, Sofia received an official notification that would have seemed impossible 3 years earlier. She was being promoted to lieutenant colonel and assigned as the new commander of Advanced Flight Integration at Skyline Advanced Flight Academy. The position represented not just career advancement, but the opportunity to lead the institution where she had once faced systematic discrimination. Her first act as Academy commander would be to establish the Merit Standards Protocol, a comprehensive system ensuring that every pilot received equal training opportunities and fair evaluation, based solely on documented performance metrics. The protocol would serve as a model for military training programs worldwide. Sofia's second act would be to personally conduct the orientation briefing for each new training cohort, sharing a simple message that summarized everything she had learned about excellence, integrity, and institutional leadership. The message she planned to deliver was straightforward. You earned your place here through skill and dedication. That's the only standard that matters, and it's the only standard we'll use. Focus on flying, focus on excellence, and let your performance speak for itself. Commander Harrison's beauty salon comment had triggered a transformation that would benefit military aviation for generations. His attempt to humiliate one combat veteran had resulted in systematic improvements that would ensure fair treatment for thousands of future pilots. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought against foreign enemies, but against the prejudices and institutional failures that can destroy good people and weaken military readiness. Sofia had won her battle not through superior firepower, but through superior preparation, unshakable professionalism, and the understanding that true leadership means using the system to protect not just yourself, but everyone who will follow in your footsteps. The beauty salon had never been about appearance. It had always been about excellence, and excellence properly demonstrated and professionally defended never goes out of style. 3 years after Commander Harrison's beauty salon comment had triggered the most significant transformation in military aviation training history, Lieutenant Colonel Sofia Martinez stood in the same briefing room where she had once faced systematic humiliation, but everything had changed. The room that had once been dominated by Harrison's arrogant presence now displayed a simple plaque reading, "Excellence knows no boundaries," and the walls featured photographs of distinguished graduates from every demographic background. Sofia was conducting her first orientation briefing as the Academy's new commander, addressing a training cohort that included 6 women among 18 total students. The demographic shift represented more than statistical progress. It reflected a fundamental transformation in military aviation culture that prioritized capability over prejudice. "Welcome to Skyline Advanced Flight Academy," Sofia began, looking out at faces that reflected genuine excitement rather than the skeptical hostility she had encountered during her own arrival. "You are here because you have demonstrated exceptional skill, dedication, and the potential for leadership in the most demanding operational environments our military faces." The students listened with focused attention, understanding that they were receiving guidance from someone whose reputation had been built through both exceptional performance and principled leadership under adverse conditions. Sofia's story was part of Academy lore now, but experiencing her leadership directly carried additional impact. "This academy operates according to one fundamental principle," Sofia continued. "Excellence is the only standard that matters. Your evaluation will be based solely on your performance, your dedication to professional development, and your commitment to the highest standards of military aviation." She paused, allowing her words to resonate before delivering the message that had become her signature theme. "You will face challenges here that are designed to push you beyond your comfort zones and develop capabilities that exceed normal military aviation standards. Some of you will encounter obstacles that seem insurmountable. When that happens, remember that true strength isn't measured by avoiding difficulties, but by how you respond to them with integrity and determination." After the briefing, Sofia walked through the Academy facilities that had been transformed since her own student days. The flight simulator bay where she had executed the perfect Viper protocol now featured updated equipment and training protocols that reflected the merit-based evaluation standards her case had helped establish. The administrative offices that had once been used to manufacture obstacles for qualified students now operated with transparency and oversight procedures that prevented systematic discrimination. The housing facilities that had been used for punitive isolation now assigned accommodations based purely on availability and program requirements. Most significantly, the Academy's culture had evolved from an environment that tolerated harassment to one that actively promoted professional excellence regardless of student demographics. Instructors underwent mandatory training on discrimination prevention. Evaluation procedures were subject to external review, and student complaints were investigated by independent authorities rather than internal personnel who might have conflicts of interest. The transformation extended far beyond Skyline Advanced Flight Academy. The oversight procedures developed during Sofia's case had been adopted at military training facilities worldwide, creating systematic protections for personnel who might otherwise face the kind of institutional harassment that had nearly destroyed her career. During her second week as Academy commander, Sofia received a visit that brought her story full circle. Major Lisa Thompson from the Inspector General's office came to review the Academy's continued compliance with anti-discrimination regulations and to assess the long-term effectiveness of the reforms implemented following Harrison's removal. Colonel Martinez, Thompson said during their private meeting, "I've investigated dozens of discrimination cases during my career, but I've never seen institutional change as comprehensive as what's happened here. Your case didn't just address individual misconduct. It transformed an entire organizational culture." Thompson's assessment was supported by measurable data. Student satisfaction scores had increased 43% since the reform's graduation. Rates had improved across all demographic categories, and discrimination complaints had virtually disappeared. The Academy was now considered a model institution for professional military training. But the validation that meant the most to Sofia came from unexpected sources. Throughout her first month as commander, she received messages from pilots stationed around the world who had been inspired by her example to address discrimination at their own installations. "Your story gave me the courage to file a formal complaint about harassment I was experiencing," wrote Captain James Rodriguez from an Air Force base in Germany. The investigation resulted in significant policy changes that have improved conditions for everyone at this facility. Similar messages arrived weekly, each one representing another person who had found the strength to fight institutional injustice. Because Sofia's example had demonstrated that change was possible through proper channels and persistent determination. The most poignant communication came from an unexpected source. Captain Maria Vasquez, the female pilot who had been targeted by Harrison during his final weeks at the Academy, wrote to thank Sofia for creating an environment where she could complete her training without facing systematic harassment. "I graduated with distinction from the program that Harrison tried to force you out of," Vasquez wrote. "My success is directly attributable to the courage you showed in fighting back against institutional discrimination. You didn't just save your own career. You saved mine and dozens of others who benefited from the changes your case created." 6 months into her command tenure, Sofia established the annual Excellence Recognition Ceremony, honoring students who demonstrated exceptional performance while maintaining the highest standards of professional integrity. The ceremony's first recipient was Lieutenant Sarah Chun, the pilot who had written to thank Sofia for transforming Academy culture. "Lieutenant Chun exemplifies the values this Academy now represents," Sofia announced during the ceremony. "Excellence based on merit, leadership grounded in integrity, and commitment to standards that serve the broader military mission rather than personal prejudice." As Sofia watched Chun receive her recognition, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from Harrison's attempted humiliation to command of the institution where it had occurred. The beauty salon comment that was supposed to destroy her career had instead become the catalyst for transforming military aviation training throughout the Department of Defense. Harrison's fate had been decidedly different. His assignment to the supply depot in North Dakota had lasted exactly 18 months before he accepted early retirement with reduced benefits. The military aviation community's memory was long, and commanders throughout the service understood that his professional judgment had been permanently discredited. His former office at Skyline Academy had been converted into a student resource center where pilots could access academic support, career counseling, and confidential reporting procedures for addressing any form of institutional misconduct. The nameplate that had once displayed his authority now simply read Student Success Center. On the first anniversary of her appointment as Academy Commander, Sofia stood in the flight simulator bay where her perfect execution of the Viper protocol had triggered Harrison's campaign of retaliation. The same equipment that had exposed his incompetence now trained a new generation of pilots who would never know they owed their fair treatment to one combat veteran's refusal to accept discrimination. Quietly, the Academy's current training cohort was conducting advanced simulations, their focus entirely on developing capabilities rather than navigating institutional prejudice. Sofia watched them work with the satisfaction that comes from knowing that important battles have been won not through personal advancement, but through systemic change that benefits everyone who follows. Commander Harrison had called her cockpit a beauty salon, intending to humiliate her before an audience of her peers. Instead, his comment had become the opening move in a campaign that transformed military aviation culture and established Sofia Martinez as one of the most influential leaders of her generation. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are those who underestimate the strength that comes from combining exceptional competence with unshakable principles. Harrison had learned that lesson too late to save his career, but his downfall had created opportunities for thousands of future pilots who would face evaluation based on merit rather than prejudice. The beauty salon comment had ultimately revealed more about Harrison's limitations than Sofia's capabilities. Excellence, properly demonstrated and professionally defended, had proven that it truly knows no boundaries. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.